The main passage this morning is often referred to in Scripture as the Jerusalem Council. It's a passage about a heavy discussion that went on in the city of Jerusalem. And as you recall, the main hub church, the church that Jesus used to start it all, is the Church of Jerusalem. And many feel that this passage in Acts 15 is really the turning point of the book of Acts. This book that Luke wrote, this scroll that he wrote, to then open up the gospel for everybody, not just the Jews, but who would welcome their long-awaited Messiah, but for the Gentiles who would also be included. And just for a quick history lesson about this incorporation of Gentiles, you'll recall several things in the studies. A couple months ago, Jerry Grassi did a great job. Taught this story, if you remember, first of all, where Peter was on the coast, and Peter had been given this calling to reach out to the Gentiles. And Peter was on his roof, and he has this vision where this kind of tablecloth thing comes down from the sky, and it's all full of these animals and foods. And these animals, many of them are unclean in the Torah. The Jews are not supposed to eat out of these. Oh, I have to mention that. Put that picture back up. Let's interrupt the sermon just for a second. Do you guys remember the neighbor? I guess I can't interrupt. Remember the neighbor behind me? That I just wanted to get my drainage fixed. Next thing I know, she's doing this cake thing, and she finds out that the guy that preached here in May started this thing, these joy jars with his daughter, remember? Started this thing that when God told his 12-year-old girl before she died of cancer. Well, she got hooked up with Eric. They just gave the first 100 cakes that my neighbor behind me did with his friend that they're starting a nonprofit. They made 100 cakes for these kids that suffer. They sent them down to Eric in Southern California, who preached here. He put them in his joy jars, and they went out to these kids. And these are the first kids, one of the first kids to receive these cakes inside the joy jars. So cool how God works. Again, I just wanted to fix my drainage. God's a little sharper than I am, to say the least. So this tablecloth, smooth transition, comes down, and God basically says to Peter multiple times, you can eat anything on this. And Peter says, no way will I eat this. These are unclean animals. And the message that God was trying to get him was not about food. It was about what God makes clean is clean. And really what he was communicating to him was, when God cleanses a Gentile, they're clean. Next thing you know, these dudes come down from up north on the coast. They say, Peter, you got to come back to our house. Come meet Cornelius. He's a Gentile guy. Peter goes up there. He actually goes into a Gentile's house, this Cornelius. Cornelius gets saved. His family gives their life to Jesus. And there's a big uproar in Jerusalem over, Peter, what are you doing? You're a Jewish holy guy. You should not be eating meals with pagan Gentiles. And Peter's like, no, you don't get it. God told me to do this. And they all said, okay, that's a great idea then if it was God's. And we thought it was your idea. Then we would know it was stupid. But since it's God's idea, it must have been a wonderful thing. After that, the second thing that happens is this Gentile movement starts. And a church, a second hub church, gets established north outside of Israel in Syria at a place called Antioch of Syria. And so now you have really the first church that Luke talks about where both Jews and Gentiles are all under the same roof. So you can see the story really unfolding. The covenant to Abraham that God would reach the world through Israel is actually happening. And so the Gentile movement is even progressing. After that church in Antioch sent Paul and Barnabas out and what we typically call the first missionary journey. They go to the island of Cyprus, they hop over to Italia, which is basically modern-day Turkey, through Perga, Antioch of Pisidian. They then go through Derbe and Iconium and Lystra, and then they go right back through all these churches. So now all these synagogues are established. They're already established, but they're established as people that are following Jesus, and Gentile people can convert. So now you've got churches all over the place with Jews and Gentiles together. So the Gentile movement to Jesus is growing. I mean, the Jews were the ones that led them to Jesus in the first place. There are Jewish followers of Jesus way more than by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands that are following Jesus, and now they're incorporating Gentiles. And this creates a bit of a problem back in Jerusalem. There's all this success with Gentiles coming to Jesus creates an issue whereby now some of the Jewish people in Jerusalem aren't sure that these Gentiles should be incorporated as easily as they're being incorporated. And before Paul can keep going on these missionary journeys to reach people for the gospel, these Gentiles in particular, this issue has to be resolved. And the issue really boiled down is whether or not a Gentile that decides to follow Jesus has to be circumcised in order to be saved, and then to put themselves under the law of the Torah and follow all the Jewish things and become what they would refer to as a proselyte. So the Jewish people that are following Jesus, some of them are saying, it's great these Gentiles want to follow Jesus, but they have to be circumcised like we are, they have to become Jewish. And they have to give themselves to following the full law of God. And you have to remember, this thinking, actually, about the Jewish people keeping separate in some sense from the Gentiles and not eating in their houses, is in the Torah. This is something God prescribed in Genesis and Exodus. And they've been following this for not like a couple years. I mean, a couple thousand years. For millennia, this thinking has existed. So this is a serious issue. It's so serious, Paul and Barnabas actually leave this church up north in Antioch of Syria, and they travel down to Israel, to Jerusalem, to try to resolve this problem. And they really address this debate kind of in a couple ways. They come at it like pastors would, but they also come at it really theologically at the same time. And we'll see these arguments. So let's start reading in Acts chapter 15. We'll read the first 5 verses. So men came down from Judea. Remember, if you're in Jerusalem, you always go down, no matter what direction it is, because it's the holy hill of God. They came down from Judea and began teaching the brethren, in Antioch of Syria, by the way, unless you are circumcised according to the customs of Moses, you cannot be saved. And when Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and some others of them should go up to Jerusalem. They're up north, but they're going up to Jerusalem because that's the holy city, to the apostles and elders concerning this issue. So Paul and Barnabas are going to go there to try to fix this problem. Verse 3, therefore, being sent on their way by the church, they were passing through both Phoenicia and Samaria, describing in detail the conversion of the Gentiles, and were bringing great joy to all the brethren. And when they arrived at Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all that God had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees, who had believed in Jesus, stood up saying, it is necessary to circumcise them and to direct them to observe the law of Moses. Again, a quick kind of history reminder of what we've studied so far and what has taken place. The church in Jerusalem finds out there's a church in Antioch of Syria. They say, Barnabas, you got to get up there. You got to get up there to teach them and to train them and to develop them and to make sure that church is heading in the right direction. So Barnabas goes from Jerusalem up to Antioch of Syria to make sure this church is taught properly. Then these prophets later come out of Jerusalem, and they're given a vision by God about a great famine that would come. They go up also behind Barnabas to Antioch of Syria, and they say, God has told us Israel is going to have a huge famine. So this famine hits, and Paul and Barnabas actually gather funds from Antioch of Syria, and they actually bring money gifts down to take care of these Jewish Jesus followers in Israel and Jerusalem. In fact, you can read about this. It's probably the visit that Paul describes in Galatians chapter 2. Somewhere along the line, Peter forgets this amazing vision about the tablecloth and this amazing scene with Cornelius, and he starts being convinced, you know what, maybe I had it wrong. There's pressure on me, and Peter and Barnabas and some other folks determine, yeah, we're not any longer comfortable eating in Gentiles' houses. Paul hears about this and blows a gasket. You read about this in Galatians 2, and when I mean blows a gasket, he blows a gasket. And he literally tells them, you aren't acting in line with the gospel. The gospel, the story of God, has always been, since Genesis chapter 12, to reach the whole world, Jews and Gentiles alike. Peter, how dare you? I mean, God lowers a tablecloth with unclean animals to get you to go to Cornelius' house, to get them to follow Jesus. And now you've gone back? This is the history. Peter resolves that issue with Paul, but then somehow this problem just won't go away. And when we get to Acts chapter 15, this problem has reached its height. There are people in Jerusalem that the leaders in Jerusalem never authorized to do this. Went all the way up to Antioch of Syria and started causing trouble and telling the Gentiles, you're really not saved because you're really not Jewish. It was widely accepted that Gentiles could join the Jewish faith, but only after being circumcised, number one, to get saved, and number two, agreeing to follow every single thing in the Torah. But these Jewish Jesus followers in Jerusalem had failed to see the radical thing that God had done. In the Old Testament, the book of Joel, the book of Amos, two great examples. God had predicted hundreds of years earlier that he was going to flip the coin over on the way life would work. That God, after he sent his Messiah, and his Messiah was exalted to the throne, was going to send his Spirit upon individuals. Not here and there, but anybody that agreed to bow their knee to Jesus as King would receive the Spirit of God inside them. The Spirit of Jesus would rest inside you. So in Acts chapter 2, after Jesus resurrects, 120 people about this size are in a room like this, and the Spirit comes down and goes into each person. This is a radical change. And these Jewish Jesus followers are confused and are losing sight of this radical change. So the issue isn't just what happens after you get saved, but it's actually how you get saved at the same time. And they resolved the issues like this in the early church by calling an assembly like this. And then the teachers, the elders and the apostles, the teachers would get together and everybody else would kind of remain silent. And the teachers would compare what they're hearing against what the Word of God says to see what they should do. And that's exactly what takes place. Now there's a couple of little highlights that we'll do before we move on to the text. One of them is, and go to the next one, it says that when they left Antioch of Syria, they went through Samaria and Phoenicia. Christine, will you pop that next one up? I wasn't sure where that is.
Is that right?
Yeah, keep going. Now you're with me. Syria of Antioch is above there. It says they go through Phoenicia, through Samaria, finally ending up in Jerusalem. This is Paul and Barnabas. They're supposed to be going to Jerusalem to solve the issue, and they can't help themselves. You know what I'm saying? This is the person that's in love with Jesus, and the wife says, just go down and get me some butter, and the next thing you know, you're just sidetracked all morning long. You meet somebody, you talk to them, oh, let me help you with this, then you meet somebody else, 3 hours later you return home, you don't even have the butter. This is Paul. He is so in love with Jesus, and he's so burdened by people, he is not going to make a straight line to Jerusalem. He just grabs anybody that will visit with him and just shares with them what God is like. I think this is so cool. The second thought that I think is really, you should highlight here for whenever you think about the Gospels, Pharisees, right? Who you and I usually think of as the greatest problem. There really weren't in the Gospels. They're coming to Jesus. Isn't that cool? Now, their theology's a little bit messed up, but they at least know Jesus. Let's read on in verse 6. The apostles and the elders, that's the teachers, came together to look into this matter. After there had been much debate, Peter stood up and said to them, Brethren, you know that in the early days, he's referring to his interaction with Cornelius and the whole tablecloth thing, God made a choice among you, that by my mouth in particular, the Gentiles would hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knows people's hearts, they would all have agreed on that. God knows the hearts. He knew what Cornelius was really thinking. Testified to them, giving these Gentiles the Holy Spirit, just as he did for us Jewish people. And he made no distinction between us and them, cleansing their hearts by faith. Isn't this cool? The point he's making in this is that the Gentiles would have been unclean because they lacked the purifying benefits of following the law. But now it doesn't matter. They're cleansed by God because they've bowed their knee to Jesus, and Jesus' blood has now cleansed them. They're not clean by doing the right thing. They're clean because they know our Messiah. Just like we're really clean, he says, by that same thing. Verse 10. Now, therefore, why do you put God to the test by placing upon the neck of the disciples? Notice, Peter doesn't refer to them as Gentiles anymore. He's saying they're disciples. They're followers of Jesus, just like you and I are. Why do you place on these followers of Jesus a yoke which neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear? But we believe that we are saved through the grace of the Lord Jesus only, in the same way as they are also. There may be no stronger theology in all of life that Paul is trying to point out, or Peter is trying to point out here. He's trying to say several things. First of all, the laws of God, the Torah in particular, is perfect. What God says is pure and holy, and if you just follow it, it works perfect. But on top of that, he says, but the bar of actually doing it is impossible. You will never, ever set out in your morning to actually obey God perfectly, to somehow earn your favor so that God likes you more. You'll never reach it. I remember preaching I was teaching in the Journey class. This is 10 plus years ago. I was teaching on the Sermon on the Mount for a bunch of time. And if you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, there's some really hard stuff in it. You know, it's where Jesus says things like, you've heard, that you're not supposed to commit adultery, but actually if you have lust in your heart, you've already done it. Or, you've heard you shouldn't murder. Let me up that a little. If you have anger in your heart towards a brother, you've already killed him. You get to the end of this thing, and then Jesus, the way Jesus only could do this, and he says, oh, by the way, and after all this, just this is not hard. Just be perfect like your Father in heaven. You get to that point, you just go, I'm out. You just wave the white flag. And I remember saying this thing, part of the point of the Sermon on the Mount is to let you know you'll never pull this off. If you're doing this out of your own energy, you'll never pull this off. And there was a guy in that class, wow, was he mad at me. He took me aside. He was a young dude, too. He's probably 10 years younger than me. He just shredded me. And I looked at him, I said, Terry, do you honestly think you can do this? And he goes, oh, absolutely. If I set my mind to this, I said, brother, have fun. Come back in 20 years when you are worn out to the nubs, and then you fall before Jesus and let him do this for you. That's what Peter's telling you. The bar is perfect. But if you're trying to use that bar to make God happier with you and get saved, you'll never do it. What we need then is for the obedience that Jesus pulled off, the perfection of Jesus, the innocence of Jesus to be handed to us. So when the Father looks at Doug, and Doug screws up, which I will share with you will happen in about 7 minutes, the Father says, no sweat. No sweat. You have the perfection of my Son. My Son already obeyed me perfectly. As long as you have that, you're in great shape. And the weight of that it just comes off my shoulders, and lo and behold, I want to do the right thing. That's the theology that Peter's sharing. Trying to work your way to God will never work. And he uses this term yoke, right? It's this thing put on an animal to carry a heavy burden. And what he's saying is, since God didn't ask the Gentiles who trusted in Jesus, right, to take on this burden, then why are we Jewish people trying to put it back on them? God just took it off of them through the perfection of Jesus. Why would we slap this right back on? Again, this is not an argument about whether what God says is perfect. Every commandment, every principle in the Bible is as perfect as it gets. The issue is rather whether you can pull this off somehow in perfection and make God just turn over backwards like saying, wow, somebody else just like Jesus can obey all this stuff. And Peter ends his address by saying, look, Jews and Gentiles are all saved the same way. They bow their knee to the King, Jesus, and Jesus takes his innocence and he pours it into our body. He imputes, is the biblical word, he imputes the righteousness of Jesus on our behalf. Any thought on our part for any moment that we are somehow going to earn our way to God's favor is, first of all, an absolute affront to Jesus. You are spitting and profaning in Jesus' face. Don't do that. He hangs on the cross in perfection, having done nothing, and says, I'm still okay with this, but do not add something to this. The Father is already satisfied with His Son, and He's satisfied with you and I only if we're satisfied with His Son. The second reason is it's just insane. It's just idiotic. And I feel that way about that guy when he came up to me. I got in my car and I thought, this sounds to me, what an idiot. And I've made the same mistake. The gospel works when we bow our knee to Jesus and say, I'm undone. Redo me. Verse 12. All the people kept silent. It means they were silent. What it really means in the Greek is they agreed. And they were listening to Barnabas and Paul, and they were relating what signs and wonders God had done through them among the Gentiles. Man, can we learn something from this, by the way. Look at these people. We can be so arrogant, and you're looking at the chief sinner amongst this. We get so fixated on what we think and how right we think we are. Look at these people. They were following something for thousands of years. Right? And Peter presents to them something different, and they check it against what God says, and they go, all right, we'll switch. This is crazy. Why do these people do this? I mean, I look at this, I think they're moved for several reasons. I think they actually drop what they know and grasp what God is presenting. First of all, because their hearts are open. They are open to actually being wrong. They walk in this door, these people in this Jewish Jerusalem church, and they sit down and they say, God, I have what I believe, and I'm so ready to let this go if you present me with something that's different than this. I also think they do it because they drop what they know when God presents something different than even what they know. And then adding to that, they look at what the Spirit of God did, and the Spirit of God is cleansing and saving Gentiles, and they say, God is moving, and it doesn't jive with the way I've thought, so I will drop what I thought. I would way rather be fixated on what God is doing and what He's presenting to me. We should ask ourselves, and I'll say this to those of you that have been in church a long time. When is the last time you learned something? Really? When is the last time you sat listening to the Word of God and you actually said, wow, that's different than what I thought. I will drop what I thought because what God is presenting to me, I see it coming from the Word, I'm going to drop that. And I don't want you to answer this. This isn't like, an AA meeting or anything. But it's a good question for us to ask ourselves. And we should do this every Sunday, every small group Bible study we go to, every journey class we go to, every person or friend you sit with that presents some view from the Word of God. You should ask yourself, what they're presenting to me? It's not, is it what I believe, does it agree with? But is it what God is presenting? We should be able to answer this question. Not very long ago, I shifted my thinking. God showed me something. And just a side note, you wonder why Paul and Barnabas stayed quiet. Paul and Barnabas are seen as part of the problem. So they get there and they sit quiet. They let Peter do the talking. Once people started getting convinced, then Paul and Barnabas chime in and they go, we've seen it. We've seen God save Gentiles. Trust me, it's working. Verse 13. After they had stopped speaking, James, this is the brother of Jesus, and he's the head of this church in Jerusalem, answered saying, Brethren, listen to me. Simeon has related how God first concerned himself about taking from among the Gentiles a person for his own name. It means God is taking these Gentiles for his own possession, just like the Jews. Verse 15. With this, the words of the prophet agree. What he's saying is, look, this isn't a new thought. The Old Testament has prophesied that God would do this, that he was going to bring in the Gentiles, and he's going to quote the book of Amos Just as written, after these things I will return, and I will rebuild the tabernacle of David, meaning I'm going to bring my king, my long-awaited king from the line of David, which has fallen, and I will rebuild the ruins, and I will restore it, so that the rest of mankind may seek the Lord, and all the Gentiles who are called by my name, says the Lord, who makes these things known from long ago. All of this, Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father. When Jesus dies, he is resurrected. When he's resurrected, he is exalted. He sits next to the Father on the right-hand side. He takes the throne of David, if you will. He is the king for all of eternity. And once he takes that throne, he then says, now I will rebuild Israel. I will reconstitute this holy people of mine. He has 12 disciples, representing the 12 tribes. Jews are coming to Jesus by the tens of thousands, by the hundreds of thousands, bowing their knee to this new king. And then he says, I'm not done yet. Once this new king, this Jesus, rebuilds Israel, now he's going to reach the rest of mankind, the Gentiles. And he says what he wants to do is, quote unquote, he wants to reach the rest of humanity so that they may seek God. Under Jesus' rule, the answer is everybody wins. And by the way, his point is, it's always been predicted like this. This is what God has always wanted to do. And then what James is going to do, as James is speaking to his church, if you will, he's going to make a set of kind of practical proposals. He wants to go back to this church in Antioch of Syria with all these Gentiles who have been all stirred up by these people about whether or not they're saved or not, and he wants to put their mind at ease. So he searches the scriptures with his other Jewish teachers, and he says, what can we say to them? What should we say to them? That's a pared down list. Since God is not requiring them to follow the entire Torah, what is God asking these Gentile Jesus followers to do? And this is my personal belief. He gives them 4 things. My personal belief is it's one thing with 3 sub-things underneath it. And my other personal belief is that what he tells them, even though it has application to you and I, is very cultural. In other words, he looks at them and he says, the biggest issue that a Gentile has in the cities where they live is different than we would be experiencing. I think if James were here today and he looked at this Gentile church, which is what you are, by the way, in case you weren't familiar with that, he would say, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 things. I think the list might look slightly different from these, quite frankly, and it'd be interesting to see what that might be. I think this is still applicable to us. And what he tells them essentially is, look, you've got pagan worship, just idolatry in these temples going on in your cities. You need to just stay away from it. It's a pollutant. If you've been to Turkey and Greece, if you've been outside of Israel in particular, it's unbelievable. You go in these cities, you go into these towns, there are just temples everywhere. And when there aren't cities, there are cities that are built that aren't even cities. They're pilgrimage places to trek to for days to go just to worship Artemis and Zeus and Mercury and all these Greek gods. It was rampant. And I mean, when you go to Corinth, and we'll talk about this in just a couple weeks, in Corinth, they worship the god Aphrodite. The city was down below. I shot video footage for you, which you'll see. And then the temple is up above. There were 1,000 temple prostitutes for Aphrodite living in the city. And you would go sleep with the prostitute to worship Aphrodite. Tell me that isn't a little man-made system. Right? And so what James is saying is, look, I know what it's like. You're not going to just add Jesus to everything else. It won't work. I want you to stay away from the pollutant of these idols. Look at verse 19. Therefore, this is what James wants to tell this church. It is my judgment that we do not trouble those who are turning to God. Let's not burden these people from among the Gentiles. But that we simply send them a letter. And then in the letter we tell them, here's what we want you to do. Abstain from things contaminated by others, polluted by others, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. The bottom line is stay away from anything associated with idolatry. And we talked about this last week. I've talked about this a dozen times. The reason God is not into idolatry is, first of all, idolatry reduces God to human form. But what happens when we make an idol is we take God and we say, let me shrink you down so I can get my hands around you. And God is not, in case you haven't figured this out, someone you get your hands around. You don't even get your arms around him. You just try to grasp the immensity and the magnificence of this God. Amen? So the first reason God says don't do it is you're reducing me to something you won't even recognize. And the second thing I said last week is we are the only thing in creation that reflects the Trinity. The Trinity, the Father and the Son and the Spirit, are in perfect relationship. They get together, they say, this is so fun, let's do more of this. They create you and I. And you and I are actually mirrors of the Trinity. We actually are made in it says the image of God. We reflect what the three of them look like. Everything else is a poor man's copy. Nothing in creation reflects the Trinity. When you and I walk around, people are supposed to be able to say, wow, when I see you, you look like the Trinity. When I see, Doug, your friendship with Brian, that's so unique. There's something behind that I'm not familiar with. So that I can say, or Brian can say, we should have got it. This is exactly what the three of them are like. That's the only reason we treat each other like this. Right? So God does not want to all be reduced, but he doesn't want to reduce our role. Our role is a magnificent role of actually displaying the magnificent one in heaven. So to make a copy of this, even, or of God, is to actually remove our significance before God as well. So he tells them to abstain from anything that you see in these temples. Just stay clear. It's not your life anymore. And then he goes on, he gives three specifics. He says abstain from fornication. I think you can take this generally. I really think it's like these temple prostitutes. He's saying, look, in these temples, they're doing some nasty stuff. This is where we get porn from. It's the porneia of Greek, right? Stay away from it. And he also says strangled animals that weren't killed properly, either found on the ground or strangled that Exodus talks about. And then the bloods. Really what he's telling them is, because this is what they did in these temple sacrifices, they're drinking blood to the gods after they sacrifice these strangled animals. It's not you anymore. Right? Have you ever had this, like you decide to come to Jesus, you're cruising along in life, and all of a sudden you either read something in your Bible and go, whoa, I didn't know that one. Right? I need to make a show. Or maybe you talk to a friend and you see what they're doing and you go, that never dawned on me that isn't part of my life anymore. That's what this is. All James is trying to say is, we don't want you to have the big list of the Torah. Just this simple concept. Just stay away from these pollutants. They have nothing to do with God. So I think these practices simply rose out of the culture that they're already in. And then he reverses this in verse 21, when he basically tells them that each one of them, these Gentiles, you need to recognize that there's Jewish people in every one of your churches. So he's trying to tell them, look, the goal here is twofold. He tells the Jewish Jesus followers, do not burden these Gentiles. They gave their life to Jesus. The holiness of Jesus has been imputed to them. They're pure. Do not weigh them down now. Do not give them the whole Torah and say, this is the only way God's going to be happy with you. God is thrilled with you if you've been cleansed by the blood of Jesus. Don't burden them. And then to the Gentiles, he says, by the way, respect the Jews that are around you. These are the holy people of God that were called to share Christ with you in the first place. And they still feel they're under the Torah, not for salvation, but because they're the people of God that the Torah was given to. If Ellen was here this morning, she would say the same thing. She does not feel that God has released her from following the Torah. She just knows that she doesn't gain righteousness through it. So it's a two-way love street, James is trying to say. Look, Jews and Gentiles, you're together now. God has finally done it. Don't mess this up. Don't burden each other. And then what James does is he grabs a group of guys. They write this letter. They send the letter up to the people of Antioch. And they basically apologize to them. We're sorry this group of guys went up there and messed you all up. You had it right to begin with. Please don't listen to them. We do not want to trouble you. We do not want to burden you. We want you to feel the light-weighted way of following Jesus by just receiving his holiness and walking around like you're just floating on air because Jesus has done this for you. And they take this letter to them and read this to them, and it's amazing. He says to them, James says, look, if you just do these 4 things, he doesn't say God will like you more. He doesn't say, God will finally not be mad at you. You know what he says? It'll go well. That's what he said. If you just stay away from the idols, it's going to work. Trust me. This is something my dad always taught us growing up. I've heard him say this 1,000 times as he would counsel people or us, and he would always say the same thing. Whenever God says something, discussion's done. There's no point in arguing about it, because the bottom line is, he's right, I'm not, so let's just go with the right. That's really what James is saying. It's going to work. Now, you can attempt another way, and then after your forehead's all bloody from hitting your head under the bricks, then you're just going to go back to the right way anyway. This will go well with you. The second thing he says is when they read this letter, this is how you know you're experiencing Christianity. They rejoiced. They were lighter. If you walk out of here at any time and you feel weighted down and guilty and like you haven't pulled your weight, you come right back to me and I will apologize to you so quick that I've distorted the gospel. You should leave here every week saying, wow, shoulder blades, they're not in my earlobes anymore, I'm relaxed, I feel the favor of God on me. We'll close with the final verses. After some days, Paul said to Barnabas, this is verse 36, let us return and visit the brethren in every city that we've already visited in which we proclaim the word of the Lord, and just make sure they're doing okay. Barnabas wanted to take John, called Mark, along with him. Paul was thrilled about that, insisting that they should not take him along because he deserted them in Pamphylia. There's a fun little deal, just in case you think we always all get along. You're smoking crack. And these occurred such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus, his hometown. And Paul chose Silas. He's one of the guys that James sent up to the north, and left, being committed by the brethren to the grace of the Lord, and he was traveling through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. I just want to close with a couple thoughts. And Christine, I'm going to go through the second thought before the first, and just throw them both up there. The first one is just a practical question. This whole idea of the contaminants, if you will, the idol thing, is it applicable to us? If James is giving them a prescription that is really a cultural issue for them, is it applicable? And the answer is, I think, of course it is. He says in 1 Thessalonians, for they themselves report about us what kind of reception we have with you. And know you turn to God from idols to serve a living and true God. This is the will of God, your sanctification. That is, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in lustful passion like the Gentiles who do not know God. Paul has a lengthy discourse in 1 Corinthians about purity and the same thing. Of course this is a good way to live. Of course God wants us to live well. There's not a commandment or a principle in the Bible that if you follow will not make your life better. Thinking that we're somehow going to invent a new way of life, which is what you see every day you're walking around. It's a bunch of people lost with no perspective like the rest of us. The only difference is they don't have the story of God to elevate their thinking. And all they're doing is all day long trying to invent life, as if they're the first one to hit the planet. Right? And the whole time God's going, let me know when you're worn out. Right? The question isn't whether these are applicable. The question is really the first point I wanted to make, which is this mystery of obedience. There's a real mystery behind how you actually do the right thing. And so just a mishmash of thoughts with this. This will be more of a Jeff Clinton dumping rather than a Brian Fury like accounting dumping. You'll get to sew this all back up when I'm done. I talked briefly about this mystery of obedience, that Jesus obeyed God perfectly. We bow our knee to Jesus. The Father says, wow, I like what you did there. I will take Jesus' obedience and I'll give it to you then. So for the rest of your life, you're perfect before God. Strap that on your thinking for a moment. That means in the midst of you sinning, as a follower of Jesus, the Father says, you still still carrying the purity of Jesus with you? What makes you sin more is thinking that is not true. Here's the mystery of obedience. And then what Satan says is, perhaps the Jews just weren't very good at it. Don't accept the purity of Jesus in your mind and go back and just pull it off on your own. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps all day long and just try to obey God all day long. If you want to have a really unsuccessful day, boy, go for that method. It just doesn't work, does it? If you've tried this, the mystery of obedience in the Bible is not the attempt at obedience. It's the relinquishing to God saying, I can't do it. I need the purity of Jesus. I need the whole mindset of Jesus in me so that I know how pure I am. And you feel so lighthearted from that all day long, you just want to do the right thing. It's a mystery. I admit to you, it doesn't sound like it would work. And on top of that, and this is a call to us as a church, be very careful what you strap your brother or sister with. Be very careful that you not do the same thing that these Jewish people were doing to these Gentiles by saying, well, what will solve your life is just 15 more pieces of obedience. No. What will solve your life is you're thinking you're still a pig. You're a child of the Son of God. Think that way, and you'll act that way. Think low, act low. Think high, act high. What James says to this church in chapter 15 is, we have heard that some of our number, to whom we never gave instruction or authority to do this, that they've disturbed you, he says, with words, unsettling your soul. Any message that compromises the purity of Jesus being given to us, any message that does that will rob you of the wealth of Christianity. Anything that we do to each other that weighs one another down. That doesn't mean if you see a brother sin, you don't say, dude, that ain't going to work. Of course we do that. Every Tuesday I sit with 6 guys. We knock the teeth out of each other, don't we, Josh? We sit around and go around the table. How's your marriage? How's it going with your kids? What's your work like? And boy, you get even remotely off course and we're just knocking the tar out of each other. It doesn't mean that we don't want to elevate each other, but mostly what we're telling each other is that is not indicative of who you are. The way you have treated your wife this week, that's not what a child of the kingdom is. So we remind each other the purity we have. We want to take the weight of all that law and say, it's not going on me, Jesus, you're really good at carrying this. Will you continue to carry this for me? Jesus every time says, absolutely, I'll carry this for you. And we respond with, wow, thank you. Wow, thank you, I want to go home and be nice to my wife. Wow, thank you, I want to actually raise my kids in a healthy way. As my dad told us last night, as from words of wisdom, wow, do I want to get my rear end home from work and actually parent my kids and love my wife and be a man in my home. That's the way it works. I deeply to my toes feel what God has done for me. I experience the purity. I experience it. I already have it. I experience and feel it. And then I do it right. What a mystery. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the clarity of these men. Guys like Paul and Barnabas and Peter and James. They're so humble. They feel like they have more knowledge in their pinky than we will have in our lifetime. And they set it all aside if it's not jiving with what you said. And thank you for this beautiful picture of people that just want to see your kingdom grow. By watching the burdens fall off people. It's a burden, heavy, dark, ugly place we live in, Father, as you know. We thank you for the levity and the purity and the holiness and the innocence of Jesus that doesn't just kind of come our way, but is deluged into our souls. All because we simply have a moment of clarity and say, Jesus, we recognize you the King. So Jesus, in your honor, we pray all these things.